you can see a skirt block here. A block is made without or done without seam allowance. It tells you on the actual block no seam allowance, and it tells you block, skirt block. Very important, you have your grain line on your block. It tells you what piece it is. So this is your center back. You have your darts, your drill hole, your hip line. And the same at the front. You have your center front, your grain line going from the top all the way down, and you have your dart, the dart notch indicated, and the end of the dart, as well as your hip line. You can see on a pattern you'll have seam allowance. So compared to the block, this is the pattern, you have added seam allowance to it. A block for a bodice would look like this. I'll just put this away. It's always half a front and half a back. So this is the front, that's the back. No seam allowance. It tells you the size, it tells you what it is, and where it belongs to. To trace your block, to make a pattern from the block, this skirt block you place onto some cardboard or paper. Most companies will work with cardboard, but I've seen it also on paper. So you trace it around, leave some room to the right because we're actually doubling this up, so we're mirroring this side over to that side, so we need some room on this side. So I'm tracing around my block, making sure I mark my hip line. I'm tracing around the hip, the waist. I'm marking my dart. Also the drill hole, that point, very important, around the waist. And I'm going down all the way to my length. Then I'm making sure I'm marking my hip, and I can take the weight off, and you need to mark your grain line. You take your block off. You always make sure that you use your pacer rather than a pencil. So a mechanical pencil. Make sure you put your hip line in, mark your dart in the middle of your dart, and your grain line. I've got it marked here. And then you want to make sure that you square off the center front to the waist. It needs to be square, and also the length. You can always double check on your block. Should be fine on the block, but you never know if it's been used a lot. I would like you to take your stiletto and score along the center front. It will help to fold the cardboard. And then we're adding seam allowance to the waist, the side, and the length. You have the waist 1.2 centimeters, that's half an inch. Side 1.2 centimeters, half an inch, and 3 centimeters on your hem. So when you mark your seam allowance, you have your clear ruler, and you get as long lines as possible. And the hem at 3 centimeters. And then you can take your cardboard and fold it along here. Our next step would be to place these together because we want to cut them, and if you don't actually put them together they will come apart. You can use the staple and staple your pattern together all the way around, and then you start cutting out your pattern, trying to keep it on the flat cut along the drawn on line, not on the outside, along it. Keep a nice smooth line, very important on a pattern. We now have to notch our seams and darts. When you notch, you use your notcher and you go in all the way along there and notch both lines straight through so you have them both notched. So I've prepared one earlier. Very important to notch your center front, so you will do that like that. You've notched your dart on the outside, your side seam, your hip, and then also the length. And you do that while your pattern is still doubled up like that. Very, very important. So we now have our back pattern piece with all the seam allowance and our front pattern piece. As you can see, the front has the writing on this side, and as we folded it, there's no writing on that side. On our back pattern piece, we only need to do one pattern piece because we're having a seam at the back, so you do not need to fold your actual pattern piece. So the difference would be, you can see this is my block, this is my pattern piece, that's the back, that's the back. So I've added seam allowance to all of these. At the front, I have only half of my block, and we've made a whole front because we're not having a seam at the front, it's as one piece. Very important once again for your pattern to have the grain line, the notches for seam lines, up here the notches for darts, the drill hole 1.5 centimeters above, so within the dart from the end of your dart, your hip line and your hem. Also you can see all this information on here. It's the actual, the name, your name, the style number, what this piece is, how many to cut, the size and how many pieces. Once you've done that, you can put a hole for the pattern hook through your pattern at the back as well. Hang them up. Put the pattern hook through, and then you have your pattern spec sheet with your style number, the pieces, all the information with a little drawing of the actual pattern piece on the spec sheet, and that also goes onto your pattern piece, and that's how you present your pattern pieces.